For 12 years, Charles had been the invisible man in the front seat, silent, reliable, never asking for a thing. So when the millionaire found him crying in the parked car that night, he knew the world had just shifted on its axis. The driver's only explanation was a single image on his cracked phone, his daughter lying in a hospital bed. Tonight, 12 years of silence would end with one impossible request. This is the story of two men bound by a silent contract of discretion, the billionaire who commanded every boardroom and the driver who knew every secret but never spoke a word. For over a decade, their worlds existed in perfect, unequal balance. But that balance was always an illusion, built on a foundation of things left unsaid. And on this cold night, with a hospital bill looming and a child's future at stake, that illusion was about to shatter forever. To understand the weight of that request, you must first understand the two worlds that existed, separated by mere inches of polished leather. In one, Alexander Thorne built a billion-dollar empire from a single patent, a man who believed every human relationship was a transaction. In the other, Charles maintained a perfect record of invisibility, a man for whom asking for help was a professional sin. Alexander's world was one of cold metrics. His fortune, estimated at $2.3 billion, was managed from the 42nd floor of a steel and glass tower. His driver was a line item, a salary of $52,000 a year, plus benefits, meticulously processed every other Friday. He knew Charles was reliable. He knew Charles was punctual. He did not know Charles had a daughter. Charles's world was governed by a different calculus. For 12 years, he navigated the city's arteries before dawn, ensuring the black sedan was spotless, the temperature set to 68 degrees, and the financial news cued on the speakers. He heard every confidential call, witnessed every stressed silence after a board meeting, and said nothing. His loyalty was his currency, and he spent it sparingly, never making a withdrawal. His daughter, Elise, was 9 years old. She had been diagnosed with a rare cardiac condition 18 months earlier. The medical bills, even with his corporate insurance, had begun a silent siege on his finances. The copays alone were $1,000 a month. The specialized treatments not covered by his plan were another $3,000. On a chauffeur's salary, saving was impossible. Debt was inevitable. For the first year, Charles managed. He took on weekend driving gigs for the service. He stopped contributing to his modest 401k. He quietly sold his late father's watch. He operated on the faith that this was a temporary storm, that the next scan would bring better news, that his disciplined silence would somehow be rewarded. But the storm did not pass. It intensified. Then 2 weeks ago, the doctors at City General presented a new option, an innovative surgical procedure. It wasn't a cure, but it promised a near-normal life. The cost was $280,000. The insurance denial letter arrived 5 days later. The procedure was deemed investigational. The balance, every single dollar, was now his responsibility. This is where the research becomes a chilling reality. 60% of full-time employees report being stressed about their finances, a number higher than during the pandemic. For Charles, it was a 100% every waking moment reality. He was trapped in the exact power dynamic analysts describe. The employer holds all the leverage, and the employee, no matter how loyal, is afraid to speak up. Charles wrestled with the impossible math. A salary advance. His company's policy stated advances were at the sole discretion of executive management. A loan. His credit was tapped. He had exhausted the small community of family and friends who could help. The only asset of any magnitude he had any proximity to was the man who sat in the back seat of his car. But to ask Alexander Thorne for $250,000 was to break the fundamental rule of their arrangement. It was to become visible. It was to transform from a flawless service into a problem to be solved. And in the corporate world Alexander inhabited, problems were evaluated, weighed, and often terminated. For days, Charles drove in a haze of sleep-deprived agony. He would drop Alexander at his penthouse, then drive to the hospital, where he would sit by Elise's bedside, holding her hand as she slept, the gentle beep of the heart monitor, a mocking counterpoint to the silence he was required to keep. He practiced the request in his mind 100 times. It always sounded like begging. Meanwhile, Alexander was fighting his own war. A hostile takeover attempt was brewing from a rival firm. His entire focus was on a midnight negotiation with investors in Tokyo. The man in the front seat was part of the scenery, a component of his logistics that was expected to function without friction. He did notice Charles seemed tired, but he attributed it to age. He made a mental note to ask HR about the driver's retirement plan options next quarter. The irony was catastrophic. The pressure reached its breaking point on a Thursday. Charles received a call from the hospital's billing department. It was not a reminder, it was an ultimatum. A down payment of $50,000 was required within 72 hours to secure the surgical slot, or it would be given to another family. Charles sat in the parked car, the phone in his hand, the city swirling around him, and for the first time in 12 years, he wept. He had driven Alexander to a late dinner at the Capitol Club. He had 2 hours. He made his decision. He would ask, not for the full amount, but for the $50,000. He would frame it as a loan against his future salary. He would offer to sign any contract. He would surrender his dignity, the last thing he truly owned, for a chance to save his daughter. He rehearsed the words until they felt hollow. He checked his uniform in the mirror. He waited. The plan was to ask at the drop-off at the penthouse when the transaction of the ride was complete. But when Alexander returned to the car that night, he was not alone. He was with his chief counsel, and their conversation was tense, rapid-fire, about subpoenas and injunctions. Alexander slid into the back seat, barely acknowledging Charles. Just drive Charles home. The moment was gone. The ask was impossible now. Charles put the car in drive, his hope crumbling, the digital clock ticking down the 64 hours he had left. He drove through the midnight streets, a man imprisoned in a cage of polished steel and his own profound silence, carrying a billionaire who had no idea he was sitting 4 feet from a collapsing world. And then, as they entered the underground garage of Alexander's building, the lawyer's phone rang. An emergency back at the office. Alexander, exasperated, waved him out. Take a cab, bill it. The lawyer vanished. The engine idled in the sudden, concrete silence of the empty garage. It was just the two of them. Charles watched Alexander in the rearview, gathering his briefcase, preparing to exit. This was it, the last possible moment. Charles drew a breath that felt like shards of glass in his chest. His mouth was dry. He turned, the leather seat creaking, the sound abnormally loud. Alexander looked up, annoyed at the delay. And Charles, the man who had navigated 12 years of flawless service, opened his mouth to finally speak. But before a single word could escape, Alexander's own phone erupted. The screen lit up his face with a cold, blue glow. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted from irritation to ice-cold fury. He held up a hand, cutting Charles off before he could begin. Not now, this can't wait. He answered the call, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Talk to me. Charles froze, his request dying on his lips. He turned back to the wheel, his hands gripping it until his knuckles turned white. He could only listen as Alexander's side of the conversation painted a picture of a crisis far more immediate to him than a driver, dying child. They did what? When? No, that's not acceptable. I'm on my way. Have the team in the war room in 20 minutes. Alexander ended the call. He didn't speak to Charles. He simply tapped the glass partition. It was the unspoken command, drive, now, the office, not home. The moment for the ask had not just passed. It had been obliterated by a corporate emergency. Charles put the car in gear, the weight of his failure crushing him. He had been ready to break his silence, and the universe had shouted him down. He drove, numb, back into the night. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the corporate tower's basement. Alexander was out of the car before it fully stopped, striding toward the private elevator without a backward glance. Wait here, he tossed over his shoulder, a habitual command. The heavy security door hissed shut behind him, leaving Charles alone in the dark, silent garage. He was out of time, out of options, out of courage. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel. The photo of Elise, smiling from her hospital bed, was the wallpaper on his cracked phone. He unlocked it and stared at her face. The 2-hour wait stretched before him, an empty chasm of despair. This was the cliffhanger of his life. A loyal man, broken by a system he served, sitting in the dark as his daughter's chance for survival slipped away, while the man who could save her with a single signature fought a battle for more millions on the 42nd floor above. And in that absolute stillness, a new, terrible realization dawned on Charles. To save Elise, he would have to do more than ask. He would have to shatter the silence completely. He would have to force Alexander to see him. The plan that began to form in his mind was not one of supplication, but of calculated, desperate leverage. He knew secrets, 12 years of them. The thought filled him with a shame deeper than any poverty, but beneath it, a father's resolve forged in fire. He was no longer just a driver waiting for a fare. He was a man with nothing left to lose, preparing to gamble his loyalty against his daughter's life. And upstairs, Alexander Thorne, convinced he was fighting the most important battle of his quarter, was utterly unaware that his most trusted employee had just become the biggest threat he would ever face. He picked up his phone, but he did not call the hospital. He opened a private, encrypted note-taking app he used for navigating the city. For years, he had innocently logged locations, times, and names, details for a driver's memory. Now he began to connect them into a different kind of map, a map of Alexander Thorne's vulnerabilities. It started with the obvious, the discreet hotel on West 48th Street where Alexander met a certain media heiress every third Thursday, while his publicist told the world he was at a tech retreat. Then there was the shell company, Aurora Holdings, whose documents Alexander had reviewed in the back seat, mentioning a property in the Cayman Islands. Charles had driven the firm's lawyer there last month. He recalled the address. But the most potent piece wasn't about money or infidelity. It was about people. 6 months ago, Alexander had forced out his co-founder, a man named David Chen, in a brutally engineered boardroom coup. Alexander had celebrated in the car, calling David sentimental dead weight. What Alexander didn't know was that Charles, during a long wait outside David's brownstone, had helped the man's grieving wife load suitcases into a taxi. David had whispered a thank you, his eyes hollow, and pressed a business card into Charles's hand. "If he ever turns on you," David had said, "call me." Charles stared at the card in his wallet. He wasn't planning to call. He was planning to present this interconnected web not as a threat, but as a demonstration of value. His argument would be cold, corporate, something Alexander might understand. "I'm not just your driver, I am your confidential archivist. My loyalty has generated this institutional knowledge. My request is an investment in retaining that asset." It was a fiction, but it was the only language he thought the man might speak. Upstairs, the war room was in chaos. The rival firm, Vector Capital, had just leaked a fabricated story to the financial press claiming Thorne's flagship product had a critical security flaw. The stock was dipping in after-hours trading. Alexander was screaming at his communications head, demanding countersuits and press releases. His entire being was focused on putting out this fire. The idea that a more personal, more profound crisis was idling in his garage never crossed his mind. 2 hours ticked by, then 3. The sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised blue. Charles had crafted his pitch. He had rehearsed it until his voice was steady. He had lined up his evidence not to expose but to illustrate. The down payment deadline was now 48 hours away. At 4:17 in the morning, the private elevator dinged. Alexander emerged, alone, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his face etched with exhaustion and simmering rage. He walked to the car and got in without a word. Charles started the engine. "Sir," Charles began, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the silence. "I need to speak with you about a matter of extreme urgency. It cannot wait." Alexander leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed. "Charles, it has been the longest night of my professional life. Unless your car is on fire, it can wait until tomorrow." "It's about my daughter, sir." The words hung in the air, heavier than any corporate secret. Alexander opened his eyes, meeting Charles's gaze in the rearview mirror. He saw a look he had never seen before, not subservience, but a determined, desperate clarity. "She is dying," Charles said, the simplicity of the statement leaving no room for deflection. "The cost to save her is $280,000. I need $50,000 of it by tomorrow. I am asking you for a loan against my next 20 years of salary." Alexander was silent for a long moment. He rubbed his temples. "Charles, medical issues, that's what insurance is for. HR can connect you with the Employee Assistance Program. They have counselors." "The insurance denied it, sir. The program's maximum grant is $5,000. It's a decimal point of what I need." Charles took a steadying breath. "I understand this is unprecedented, which is why I want to show you why I am worth the investment." He reached for his phone, his hand trembling slightly despite his resolve. "Stop," Alexander commanded, his voice sharp. "What is on that phone?" "Proof, sir, of my discretion and my unique value to you, not as a driver, as a keeper of your context." Charles proceeded, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't show the screen, but he described it. "For instance, the meetings at the Lombardy Hotel with Elena Vance. I've ensured discretion there for 3 years. The negotiations for the Aurora Holdings property in Grand Cayman. I coordinated the secure transport of those documents. And when you parted ways with David Chen, I maintained a respectful silence, though he offered me a conduit should I ever need one." The air in the car turned to ice. Alexander's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a predatory focus. "Are you blackmailing me, Charles?" "No, sir," Charles said, the word rushing out. "I am demonstrating loyalty. A blackmailer threatens to reveal. I am offering to continue to conceal. I am asking you to invest in the preservation of my silence and my daughter's life." Alexander stared at him, his mind racing. The driver had just proven he was not an appliance. He was a repository. In the midst of a corporate attack, this was a catastrophic vulnerability. His first, instinctive reaction was not compassion, but risk assessment. This was a problem that needed to be contained. "Pull over," he said, his voice low. Charles guided the car to a deserted side street near the waterfront. The first hint of dawn painted the skyline in gray. Alexander got out of the back seat and opened the front passenger door. He sat down next to Charles, a profound breach of their normal protocol. He looked at the man, really looked at him. The weary eyes, the worn hands on the wheel, the cheap phone with the cracked screen displaying a little girl's photo. "Give me the phone, Charles." "So?" "The phone with your notes." Alexander's tone left no room for refusal. It was the voice he used before acquiring a competitor. After a paralyzing second, Charles unlocked it and handed it over. Alexander scrolled silently for 2 minutes, his face unreadable. He saw the entries. They were not salacious, but they were precise. Dates, license plates, fragments of overheard conversation about merger codes. It was a chronicle of trust, weaponized by despair. He handed the phone back. "You understand that if any of this ever leaves this car, I will not sue you. I will bury you, and it will not be with lawyers. It will be with people who make problems disappear. Do you understand the position you've just put yourself in?" Charles felt a cold dread seep into his stomach. He had gambled on Alexander seeing reason, seeing the human value. He was now seeing only threat. "I understand, sir. I am not a threat. I am asking for help." Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, an update on the Vector Capital situation. The duality of his crises was now complete, a corporate shark attacking from the outside, and what he perceived as a potential leaker sitting beside him. In that moment, a brutal calculus took over. He could solve one problem with money. $250,000 was nothing. But could he trust this man afterward, or would this become a recurring invite? "I will have $50,000 transferred to your account by 9 a.m., Alexander said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Consider it a severance package. You will resign today. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive it will bind your grandchildren, and you will never speak to me or about me again." Charles's world, which he thought had hit bottom, found a new level of devastation. He was being paid off and fired. The help he needed came at the cost of the only stable thing he had left, his job, his identity. "My daughter needs ongoing care, sir. This procedure is just the beginning. I need my job, my insurance." "Your insurance will be covered under Cobra for 18 months. That's a you problem." Alexander's voice was final. "This is the deal, Charles. Take the money, save your girl tonight and walk away clean, or don't and fight me. But if you fight me, you will lose, and you will lose her too." He got out of the car and walked around to the driver's side window. "Drive me home, then go to the office, clean out your locker and see legal on the 5th floor. We are done." The remaining drive was conducted in a silence more absolute than any before. The transaction was complete, but not the one Charles intended. He had been purchased and decommissioned. He dropped Alexander at the penthouse, received a stiff, silent nod, and watched him walk away. The weight of the money he would receive was drowned by the anchor of his shattered future. He drove to the corporate tower one last time. In his sterile locker was a faded photo of Elise from a school fair years ago before she got sick. He took it. He was escorted to the legal department where a stern-faced associate had a stack of papers ready. The NDA was, as promised, breathtaking in its scope. It forbade him from disclosing anything learned during his employment, defined as any and all observations, in perpetuity. The penalty was $5 million in damages. As Charles read the clause about damages, a new chilling thought emerged. Alexander wasn't just silencing him, he was ensuring that if Charles ever spoke, the resulting lawsuit would bankrupt him and seize any future assets, including, potentially, the money for Elise's future care. The help was a trap disguised as a lifeline. With a hand that felt like lead, he signed. He was given a certified check for $50,000. The associate's tone was polite but cold. The funds have been deposited. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Your access badges are deactivated. Security will see you out. Charles walked through the gleaming lobby for the last time, a ghost in his own uniform. He drove the company sedan to the dispatch garage, handed in the keys, and called a taxi. As he rode toward the hospital, the dawn now full, the check in his pocket felt like a bomb. He had the down payment. He could secure the surgery, but at what cost? He was now unemployed, bound by a legal chainsaw of a contract, and utterly alone. At the hospital, he paid the $50,000. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. He sat by Elise's bedside, holding her hand, feeling no victory, only a profound and terrifying uncertainty. He had traded one crisis for another. He had saved her immediate life, but he had incinerated their future's foundation. Meanwhile, Alexander, attempting to sleep in his penthouse, found he could not. The driver's face, the photo of the girl, the quiet desperation, it kept intruding upon his thoughts of stock dips and board maneuvers. He replayed the conversation. He had reacted as a CEO, not as a man. A nagging, unfamiliar feeling began to gnaw at him. Shame. He had looked at a loyal man's breaking point and seen only a liability to be managed. He had solved the problem, but he had not answered the plea. To quiet his mind, he did something he never did. He called his head of human resources, not for a report, but for a question. The driver, Charles, what do we have on file for him? Next of kin, emergency contact. The HR head, confused, pulled up the file. Let's see, Charles Weller. Emergency contact is listed as Elise Weller, daughter. There's a note about a dependent health insurance claim filed last year for a congenital heart condition. It looks like there were several appeals. They were all denied by the carrier. Alexander felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Why were they denied? Standard procedure, sir. The treatments were classified as experimental. The policy is very clear on exclusions. And no one thought to flag this. A 12-year employee facing this. Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Sir, with respect, we have 23,000 employees. The system flags patterns, not individual tragedies. The appeals were handled per the insurance contract. Alexander ended the call. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the waking city. He had built an empire on efficiency, on systems, on contracts. And that same system, his system, had methodically pushed a faithful man to the brink, and then his own response had pushed him over. He had paid the man to go away, to make the human problem disappear, just like the Vector Capital story. It was clean. It was professional. It felt utterly, despicably hollow. He thought of the NDA he'd made Charles sign, the $5 million penalty. He had essentially told a father, I'll save your child, but I own your silence forever. The leverage he'd accused Charles of seeking, he had now conclusively established himself. He was no better than the rivals trying to gut his company. And then his personal phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. His blood ran cold. He opened it. It was a single photograph taken from a distance but clear. It was him entering the Lombardy Hotel on a Thursday night. The timestamp was from last month. The second message followed. Interesting company you keep, Alexander. Vector Capital would love to know how you secure your media partnerships. Let's talk. A friend. The corporate attack and the personal vulnerability had just collided. Someone was targeting him, and they knew about Elena Vance. The list of people who knew was vanishingly small. His lawyer, his security chief, and the driver he had just fired hours ago. Alexander's head snapped up. Was this Charles? Had he been played? Was the entire desperate father routine a long con to get a payout before selling secrets to the highest bidder? The rage returned, white-hot and absolute. He had been betrayed. He picked up his phone to call security, to have Charles arrested, to tear up the check. But his finger hovered over the call button. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Vector Capital moves against him publicly. Hours later, his driver presents a problem. He fires the driver. Minutes later, he gets a blackmail photo about the very secret the driver mentioned. It felt like a setup. It felt like Vector was using Charles, or that Charles was working for them. He needed to know, and he needed to know now. He didn't call security. He called his most discreet private investigator. I need everything on Charles Weller, his finances, his communications for the last 6 months, any contact with Vector Capital or their affiliates, and I need it in 2 hours. He then texted his lawyer, do not release the final severance payment, put a hold on everything. Down at the hospital, Charles's phone rang. It was the hospital billing office. Mr. Weller, we are so sorry. There's been a hold placed on the certified check from your employer. The funds are frozen. We cannot proceed with the surgery without cleared funds. The floor fell out from under Charles. He staggered, gripping the bedside rail. Alexander had done it. He had offered salvation and then snatched it back. The cruelty was so precise, so calculated, it stole the air from his lungs. He looked at Elise, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her chance had just vanished. A furious primal energy surged through him, burning away the last of his subservience. Alexander Thorne had declared war, not on a rival CEO, but on a father, and Charles was done playing by the rules of a game designed to break him. He had nothing left to protect, which meant he had everything to fight with. He kissed his daughter's forehead, walked out of the room, and pulled out his phone. He didn't call David Chen. He opened a public social media app. He began to type. He would tell his story, not the secrets, just the story, the loyal driver, the sick child, the billionaire who offered help and then yanked it away. He would let the court of public opinion do what the legal system never would, hold Alexander Thorne accountable. And as he typed the first sentence, for 12 years, I drove a billionaire in silence. Last night, I asked him to save my daughter's life. 2 men, now locked in a death spiral of mutual destruction, raced toward a confrontation that would leave only one of them standing. The private war had just gone public. But the social media post was never sent. Charles's thumb hovered over the button, and then his phone rang again. This time, it wasn't the hospital. The caller ID read, unknown. He answered, and a calm, unfamiliar voice said, Mr. Weller, my name is David Chen. I believe we have a common problem. Charles stood frozen in the hospital hallway. David Chen, the exiled co-founder, the man whose card he still carried. How did you get this number? Charles asked, his voice a wary whisper. The same way I know Alexander just fired you and froze your funds, David replied, his tone analytical, not sympathetic. I've had certain systems monitoring his executive actions since my departure. Your termination and the payment freeze triggered an alert. I'm calling because his problem is about to become your opportunity. David explained the situation with cold precision. He was not with Vector Capital. He was building his own venture fund, and he had been gathering intelligence on Alexander's weaknesses for a potential proxy fight. The blackmail photo Alexander received, that was from David's team, a test to see how Alexander would react under pressure. He reacted by turning on you, David said, proving he's paranoid, ruthless, and vulnerable. You are now a loose end he cannot tolerate. He will come for you, Charles, not with money, with lawyers, and then with worse. Charles felt the walls closing in. What do you want from me? I want to offer you a contract, David said. I will pay the full $280,000 for Elise's surgery today. I will also pay for a top-tier medical advocate to handle her ongoing care. In return, you will provide a sworn affidavit detailing everything you observed during your employment, specifically any instances of Alexander using company resources for personal indiscretions or manipulating board votes, the information you mentioned to him this morning. I need it on the record. It was the same ask, but from a different master. Alexander wanted his silence. David wanted his testimony. Both wanted to use him as a weapon. You're asking me to break my NDA. He'll sue me into oblivion. The NDA is designed to protect trade secrets, not to conceal personal misconduct, David countered. If his misconduct is material to a shareholder action, it's unenforceable. My lawyers are certain. I'm not asking you to go public. I'm asking you to give a private deposition. Your identity will be protected under confidentiality order until we file. By the time Alexander knows it's you, the battle will be over and you'll be under my protection." The offer was a lifeline. It was also a trapdoor. Charles would be trading one powerful enemy for another, more calculative ally. He looked through the window at his sleeping daughter. The clock was ticking. "I need to think," he said. "You have 1 hour," David replied. "The moment Alexander's security team is done digging into your life, he will send someone to clarify the situation with you. You are out of time to think. You are only left with time to choose." The call ended. Charles slumped against the wall. His phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was from the hospital's finance department, a formal notice of procedural cancellation for the surgery due to non-payment. The sterile language felt like a death sentence. Across town, Alexander's private investigator delivered his report. The findings were explosive and not what Alexander expected. First, Charles's financials, a descent into medical debt, no unusual deposits, no contact with Vector or any competitor. The man was exactly what he appeared to be, a desperate father. Second, the blackmail photo. It was traced to a burner phone purchased with untraceable cryptocurrency, but the digital footprint led back to a shell company recently founded by David Chen. Alexander's blood ran cold. This wasn't Charles, this was David. His old friend was making a move, and he had used Charles's desperation as a distraction. The shame he had felt curdled into a new, more complex emotion. He had misread the battlefield. He had attacked the wrong target. In his paranoia, he had taken a loyal man and shoved him directly into the arms of his most cunning enemy. His lawyer called. "The social media teams are flagging something. A draft post from a Charles Weller. It's in a private group for rideshare drivers, but it's gaining shares. The narrative is damning. Loyal employee, sick child, cruel billionaire." Alexander closed his eyes. The story was out there in embryo form. David Chen would know how to weaponize it, to paint Alexander as a monster and sway shareholder sentiment. He had to contain this. But the old method, threats, money, force, had already failed. He had tried that and created this mess. A new idea, foreign and terrifying, formed. What if he stopped being a CEO managing a liability and started being the man Charles had needed him to be 12 hours ago? The risk was monumental. It meant vulnerability. It meant admitting a catastrophic error. It meant walking into a situation where he had zero control. He made 2 calls. First, to his CFO, release the hold on Charles Weller's severance. Then, transfer $250,000 from my personal account to the hospital designated for Elise Weller's care. Do it now and get me a confirmed receipt within 30 minutes. The CFO, stunned, complied without question. Second, he called his head of security. "I need an address. The hospital where Charles Weller's daughter is a patient, and I need to go there, alone, right now." "Sir, given the threat profile from David Chen, that's not advisable. We should." "Now," Alexander said, his voice leaving no room for debate. Meanwhile, Charles's hour was up. His phone rang. It was David Chen. "Have you decided?" Charles looked at his daughter, then at the cancellation notice on his phone. He had no choice. To save her, he had to ally with a stranger against the devil he knew. "Yes," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll do it. Send the money to the hospital. I'll sign whatever you need." "The funds are transferring as we speak," David said. "A courier is already on his way to you with the affidavit. Sign it, and your daughter's surgery will proceed this afternoon." 10 minutes later, a man in a nondescript suit approached Charles in the hospital cafe. He handed over a tablet with a digital document. It was exactly as described, a request for a detailed deposition about Alexander Thorne's personal conduct. Charles scrolled through the legalese. It felt like signing his own death warrant, but for Elise, he would sign anything. He used the stylus and scrawled his signature. The courier nodded, took the tablet, and left without a word. 5 minutes later, Charles's phone dinged. A text from the hospital's financial office. "Payment received in full. Surgery is rescheduled for 4 p.m. Please report to pre-op by 2." The relief was so profound it was physical. He wept right there in the cafe. He had done it. He had saved her. The cost was his future, his safety, but she would live. He rushed back to Elise's room to tell her the good news. At exactly 1:15, Alexander Thorne's black sedan pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. He stepped out, alone, without security. He was recognized immediately by a staff member, causing a ripple of whispers. He ignored them, marching straight to the information desk. "I need the room for Elise Weller. Her father, Charles Weller, is with her." The wide-eyed clerk gave him the room number. Alexander took the elevator up, his mind racing. He had the bank receipt in his pocket. He didn't know what he would say. He only knew he had to say something. He reached the correct floor and turned down the hallway, and there, standing outside a hospital room, was Charles. He was facing away, looking through the window at his daughter. Alexander stopped, 10 feet away. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Charles," Alexander said. Charles turned slowly. When he saw Alexander, his expression didn't shift to fear or anger. It settled into a deep, exhausted resignation. He believed Alexander was there to enforce the NDA, to threaten him after discovering his deal with David Chen. He stepped away from the door, putting himself between Alexander and his daughter's room. "You've done enough," Charles said, his voice flat. "The money is gone. You won. Just leave us alone." Alexander took a step forward, then stopped. He reached into his jacket. Charles tensed, expecting a legal document, a threat. Instead, Alexander pulled out his phone. He opened an app and showed Charles the screen. It was a confirmed wire transfer receipt to the hospital, dated 30 minutes ago, for $250,000. "The money isn't gone," Alexander said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "It's here, for everything. The surgery, the aftercare, everything she needs." Charles stared at the screen, uncomprehending. It was a trick. It had to be. "Why?" "Because I was wrong," Alexander said, the words feeling alien in his mouth. "I assessed you as a risk. I was so focused on the fire in my own house, I didn't see I was pouring gasoline on yours. I fired the most loyal man I've ever employed because I was scared of what he knew. And in doing so, I sent you straight to David Chen." Charles's blood ran cold. He knew. How could he know? "I don't know what you're talking about. The blackmail photo wasn't from you. It was from David. My investigator confirmed it an hour ago. He's playing us both, Charles, and you just signed something for him, didn't you?" Charles said nothing, but his silence was confirmation. Alexander nodded, a grim understanding dawning. He offered to pay for Elise in exchange for testimony. "Am I right?" Charles's continued silence was answer enough. "He's not your savior, Charles. He's using you as a scalpel to cut me out of my own company. Once he has what he needs, your usefulness ends, and I will be too busy fighting for my life to protect you from the fallout." The reality of his bargain with David suddenly sharpened into horrifying focus. He had traded a known, ruthless quantity for an unknown, strategic one. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. "What do you want?" Charles whispered. "I want to fix what I broke," Alexander said. He took another step closer. "The money is yours, no strings, no NDA. I've already instructed legal to nullify the agreement you signed this morning. It was signed under duress. It won't hold. I'm reinstating you with a substantial raise and a promotion to head of executive security. Your sole job will be to help me protect this company from David Chen. You know his mind. You know how he operates." It was a staggering offer. More money, security, respect. It was everything he needed. And it felt like a deeper, more gilded trap. "Why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't," Alexander said frankly. "I've given you no reason to. All I can give you is this, a choice. You can take my money and my job and help me stop the man who is trying to destroy us both. Or you can honor your deal with David, become his star witness, and hope he's a man of his word. But ask yourself this, which one of us has a 12-year record of keeping our word to you, even if it was a cold, transactional one? And which one just appeared today, offering salvation in exchange for a knife in the back?" The question hung in the antiseptic air. Charles looked from Alexander's tense, earnest face to the phone screen showing the $250,000 transfer. He looked through the window at Elise, now awake and coloring, unaware of the war being waged over her life. He was caught between two billionaires, each offering a version of salvation tied to destruction. To choose, Alexander was to bet on a reformed tyrant. To choose, David was to bet on a charming manipulator. There was no clean path. And then Charles's phone buzzed. A new email from David Chen's legal team. The subject line, urgent deposition schedule. The message outlined a meeting for the next morning with a panel of lawyers. The final line read, "Please be advised, your affidavit has been preliminarily filed under seal with the court as part of a shareholder derivative action. Your cooperation is now a matter of legal obligation." David had moved. He had filed the affidavit already. He hadn't waited. Charles was now legally bound. He showed the email to Alexander, his hand trembling. Alexander read it, and his face turned to stone. The chessboard had just been kicked over. David wasn't playing for a deposition, he was playing for checkmate. By filing the affidavit, he had forced Charles into the open and initiated legal war. Alexander's offer of protection was now null. The battle was no longer impending. It had begun. He looked at Charles, and in that moment, their fuses burned down to the same powder keg. "He's declared war on both of us," Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not a pawn anymore, Charles. You're a battlefield, and I'm sorry, but you're standing right in the middle of it." The two men stood in the silent hallway, the gulf between them now filled with a common enemy. The personal plea had become a corporate war. The quiet driver and the arrogant billionaire were now reluctant allies in a fight for survival, with a little girl's future as the prize and a mountain of secrets as the weapon. The final battle would not be fought in a boardroom or a courtroom first. It would be fought here, in this hospital, in the next few hours, before the sun set. The standoff in the hallway was shattered by the swing of a hospital room door. A nurse stepped out, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Weller, we're ready to take Elise to pre-op. She asked for you." In that moment, the corporate war, the legal filings, the billion-dollar stakes, all of it compressed into a single human decision. Charles looked at Alexander, then at the nurse. His daughter needed him, nothing else mattered. He turned and walked into the room, leaving Alexander alone in the corridor. Alexander did not leave. He stood there, a solitary figure in a $10,000 suit, watching through the window as Charles helped a small, brave girl into a wheelchair. He saw Charles lean down and whisper something that made her smile. He saw her clutch a worn, stuffed rabbit. He saw the pure, uncomplicated love on the driver's face, a currency his billions could never mint. Alexander's phone vibrated incessantly, calls from his lawyer, his board, his security chief. He ignored them all. He was witnessing the consequence of his life's philosophy, and it was a child in a wheelchair being rolled toward a life-saving surgery he had almost prevented. The shame solidified into a resolve. He would not let David Chen use this man or this child as pawns. He pulled out his phone and finally answered his lawyer. "I'm at the hospital. David Chen has filed a sealed motion using an affidavit from my former driver. I need you to do two things immediately. First, file an emergency motion to unseal it and transfer the entire matter to a private arbitrator, citing David's history of malicious litigation. Second, draft a press release from me, personal, not corporate. Subject is a personal accountability. Have it ready for my sign-off in 1 hour." His lawyer was sputtering. "Alexander, an apology press release during a takeover attempt, that's strategic suicide." "Just do it," Alexander said, and ended the call. Inside the preoperative area, Charles held Elise's hand as the anesthesiologist explained the procedure. Her eyes were wide, but she was calm. "Daddy, is the rich man outside a good guy or a bad guy?" she asked softly. Charles hesitated. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's helping us right now. That's what matters." "Okay," she said, trusting his judgment as she always had. As they prepared to administer the mild sedative, she squeezed his hand. "Will you say our prayer with me?" Charles bowed his head, his forehead touching hers. He whispered the simple prayer they said every night, his voice breaking. "Dear Lord, watch over my brave girl, keep her safe, bring her back to me." As Elise's eyes fluttered closed, Charles felt a presence behind him. He turned. Alexander was there, standing just inside the curtain, having been granted permission by a confused but deferential nurse. "May I?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the space beside Charles. Charles, too drained to protest, nodded. Alexander stepped forward. He looked at the sleeping child, at the tubes and monitors, at the stark reality of the vulnerability he had dismissed as a human resources issue. He didn't speak, he just observed. After a full minute, he said, "She's stronger than both of us." The surgical team arrived to wheel Elise away. Charles kissed her forehead, a tear finally escaping down his cheek. As the doors swung shut behind the gurney, the two men were alone again in a sterile anteroom. The crisis had bifurcated, one part in the operating theater, the other in the legal arena. Alexander broke the silence. "David's legal maneuver is aggressive, but it's a blitzkrieg. He's betting on shock and speed. He wants a public, messy fight that tanks my reputation and the stock price, making it easier for him to swoop in with his investor group. Your affidavit is his primary weapon, but a weapon can be turned." "How?" Charles asked, the fight back in his eyes. "By testifying," Alexander said, "but not in his deposition. In mine, I've directed my lawyers to file for arbitration and to subpoena you as my witness. You will sit in a room and tell the absolute, unvarnished truth. Everything, the hours I kept, the calls you overheard, the hotel visits, my reaction when you asked for help, all of it. You will not be violating your NDA because I will be waiving it in that forum for that purpose." Charles was stunned. "You want me to testify against you?" "I want you to testify about me," Alexander corrected. "The full picture, the ruthless CEO and the man who failed a loyal employee. David is betting your testimony will be a dagger. I'm betting the full story is more complicated, that a jury or an arbitrator might see a flawed man trying to make amends. They might see a father fighting for his child and an employer who, however belatedly, is fighting for him. David's narrative is black and white. We give them gray." It was a staggering gamble. Alexander was risking his entire empire on the hope that raw, ugly truth would be more sympathetic than a curated lie. "And if they just see the monster?" Charles asked. "Then I lose," Alexander said simply. "But you will have told the truth under subpoena, fulfilling your legal obligation, and you will be protected from David's lawsuit. And your daughter will have her health. That's the deal. You help me tell the whole story, and I bear the consequence." The surgery took 4 hours. Alexander stayed. He made calls, yes, orchestrating his legal counterattack, but he remained in the hospital. He brought Charles coffee. They didn't speak much. The shared vigil forged an uneasy, silent truce. During the 3rd hour, Alexander's press release went out. It was a seismic event in the business world. The headline, "A Lesson in Leadership, My Failure and a Promise." In it, Alexander did not mention David Chen or the takeover. He wrote about an employee of 12 years, a child with a critical illness, and his own failure to see the human being behind the role. He admitted to firing the man in a moment of panic. He announced he had personally covered all medical costs, reinstated the employee with a promotion, and was conducting a full audit of the company's health insurance policies. He ended with, "True leadership is not about never failing. It is about having the courage to face that failure and fix it. I am learning." The financial media erupted. Some called it a masterful PR stunt to blunt David's attack. Others called it a shocking moment of corporate humility. The stock, which had been dropping, stabilized. David Chen's narrative of a purely predatory Alexander was suddenly muddled. As Elise was moved to recovery, the doctor found Charles and Alexander. "The surgery was a textbook success. She's going to be okay. She'll need monitoring, but she can have a full, active life." The relief that washed over Charles was a physical force. He sank into a chair, sobbing. Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder, a clumsy but genuine gesture. "Thank you," Charles managed to say to the doctor, to the heir, to Alexander. "Don't thank me," Alexander said. "Just be ready to tell the truth next week." The legal battle was furious but short. In the arbitration hearing, Charles sat in the witness chair. He answered every question from David Chen's sleek, aggressive lawyer. He confirmed the details of the affidavit, the secrets, the meetings, the cold calculus. He did not shy away. Then Alexander's lawyer had his turn. He led Charles through the rest of the story, the years of loyal service, the medical debt, the desperate ask, the firing, the frozen funds, and finally, the hospital vigil and the full payment of the bills. He presented the press release as evidence of corrective action. The arbitrator, a retired judge, listened impassively. David Chen's case rested on proving Alexander was unfit to lead due to personal misconduct. Charles's testimony proved the misconduct, but it also proved something else: capacity for change. The arbitrator took a week to deliberate. The ruling, when it came, was a split decision. She found that Alexander had engaged in conduct that created significant risk for the company. She ordered him to step down as chairman of the board for a period of 2 years, remaining as CEO but under increased board oversight. She also invalidated David Chen's shareholder action, citing its malicious timing and use of a coerced affidavit. David's takeover attempt was dead. Alexander had lost a battle, his chairmanship, to win the war. More importantly, the public story had solidified, not a tale of a perfect victim and a perfect villain, but a messy story of failure and partial redemption. The company's reputation, ironically, improved. In the weeks that followed, a new normal settled. Charles took on his new role not as a driver, but as a director of corporate security, using his intimate knowledge of Alexander's life to protect it, this time with proper resources and respect. His salary tripled. Elise recovered beautifully. One evening, months later, Alexander asked Charles to drive him, not as an employee but as a request. They took the old sedan. The silence was different now, comfortable, not charged. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked, looking out at the city, "not coming to me sooner?" Charles was quiet for a moment. "I regret that I had to become a threat to be seen as a human being." The truth of it hung in the air. Alexander nodded. "So do I." He then revealed the final, surprising detail: the audit of the insurance policies. "We're overhauling them. We're creating a fund for employees facing catastrophic medical denials. It's named after Elise, the Elise Fund. It won't fix the past, but it might keep someone else from having to sit in a car, crying, trying to find the courage to ask." Charles stopped at a red light. He looked at Alexander in the rearview mirror, not as a boss, but as a man. He saw the weariness, the cracks in the arrogant facade, and the genuine, hard-won effort to be better. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time, but it was something perhaps more valuable: recognition. "That's a good thing, Alexander," Charles said, and for the first time he used his first name. The light turned green. They drove on, the two sides of a broken contract now slowly, painfully being knit into something new. The loyal driver had asked for a favor. The billionaire had finally learned how to give one, not from a place of power, but from a place of shared, flawed humanity. The story that began with a cry in a dark garage ended not with a courtroom victory or a financial windfall, but with a simple, ongoing choice: to see and to be seen. The miracle wasn't the money or the surgery. It was the shattered silence itself, which finally allowed two men in two separate worlds to hear each other. And in that hearing, they both found a way forward. So what does this story of a billionaire and his driver truly leave us with? It's not a fairy tale of sudden transformation, nor a simple parable of good and evil. It is a blueprint of the invisible walls we build between ourselves and the staggering cost of maintaining them. For 12 years, Charles believed his value was in his silence, his invisibility. For 12 years, Alexander believed his power was in his distance, his transactional clarity. Both were trapped in a system of their own making, a system that equated professionalism with emotional disconnect. The crisis did not create their problem. It merely exposed the fault line that had always been there, running right through the center of their shared car. This story holds up a mirror to a world where 60% of employees are stressed about finances but feel they cannot speak up, where power dynamics silence need, and where loyalty is often a one-way street leading to a dead end. The Elise Fund is a fictional solution, but the problem it addresses is devastatingly real: the gap between the help people need and their ability to ask for it. The real victory here was not the legal ruling or the corporate restructuring. It was the dismantling of a silence. Charles's courage to finally speak, and Alexander's harder-won courage to finally listen, created a bridge where only a chasm had existed. They discovered that the most powerful contract is not written on paper, but forged in mutual recognition. We all inhabit roles: boss, employee, parent, friend, and we all at times hide our struggles behind the mask of those roles, fearing that to be seen in need is to be seen as weak. But this story asks us, what might happen if we dared to see the person behind the function? What miracles of connection are we missing because we are too busy managing transactions to notice the human beings across from us? Alexander learned that empires built on pure transaction are hollow, and that true legacy is found not in wealth, but in impact. Charles learned that his dignity was not in his stoic silence, but in his righteous claim to be seen. Together, they wrote a new definition of strength: the strength to be vulnerable, the strength to admit failure, and the strength to extend a hand across the divide. Their journey reminds us that redemption is never a grand, sweeping event. It is a series of small, difficult choices. It is choosing to stay in a hospital hallway. It is choosing to waive a legal right. It is choosing to use a first name. It is in these quiet moments that the world is remade, one healed connection at a time. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to ask for help or to offer it, because the next Charles might be in your orbit and the next Alexander might be in your mirror. The bridge always starts with a single, courageous word. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for more documentaries that explore the profound stories hidden in everyday life. Until next time.